Okay, so before we begin, let's make sure that we recognize some of the public officials who are here today. And most of you will recognize them, but for those of you who may not, I'd like you to stand when I read your name, if you would please. And if you would hold your applause until after all have been introduced, I would be grateful. Thanks. First, Robin DeSabatino, County Commissioner. Good to have you with us. Patrick Roth, City Councilman. Good to have you with us. Betsy Banak, County Commissioner. And Carol Whitmore, County Commissioner. We thank you for your service to the community. So today we will talk about a subject that I mentioned before has probably been kicked around a few times, that of the charter form of government. And our vice president, who is actually our past president as well, has worked fearlessly to make sure that we bring this topic to the community. She's also made sure that we have a very informed speaker today. And I would like to turn the introduction of our speaker over to her. And this would be Rosalie Schaefer. Rosalie.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee, and thank you for taking over the presidency, which is a tough job, but somebody has to do it. Today we're going to talk about a very important subject for our county, charter government. Our league has had a long interest in this subject. In fact, a few years ago, one of our members decided to do some research on it, and while she was doing research on it, she also decided to go get her doctorate from FSU. So she left town and she's working on her doctorate. Guess what her dissertation is going to be on? Charter government. So anyway, we decided to bring this up because it hasn't been discussed for a while, and we wanted to bring in an expert who could tell us yes or no, fact or fiction, so that we all develop a strong information base with which to work with before we develop our own opinions and decide how to approach it, or if even we're interested in approaching it. So we brought in Virginia Delegal, and she is the General Counsel for the Florida Association of Counties. She flew in today from Tallahassee to give this talk. She's an honors graduate of the Mercer University School of Law in Georgia and Salem College in North Carolina. She spent the first 10 years, thank you, of her career in private practice. As part of her firm's general government law group, she represented local governments, primarily on issues of finance and tax, home rule, and other constitutional matters. She became general counsel for the Florida Association of Counties in 2003. She's a frequent speaker and author on topics of interest to local government, communities in Florida, and serves on Florida Bar Association committees. And she's taught a college course on the U.S. Constitution. Her husband, Mark, is also a lawyer, and they have 3 young children. We are very honored to have an expert of her caliber on this topic. After her presentation, we will invite questions from the audience. When we get to that point, please use the microphone on the side of the room so that your voice will get into the tape that METV is making of our program today. Okay, and when that time comes, please also state your name and ask your question. Okay, I turn the program over to Ms. Delagal.
Wow, that was awfully kind. Obviously need to update my resume because my children are now 15, 14, and 11, and they would probably quibble with the term expert. They would correct you quite quickly. I'm mom now, mom knows nothing at that age, and they're all girls, by the way. It is my absolute great pleasure to be here. This is what I love to do, is to share some of the concepts related to county government, particularly in Florida, with local communities. It's part of our mission at the Florida Association of Counties, which I need to spend just a second or two talking about a little bit. But before we get started, when I was in high school, my American history teacher, wasn't a professor, but my teacher, here I am 16, 17 years old, I don't remember, first day of class, all excited, there's no textbook for American history. I'm thinking, this is awesome. Here I am, a teenager, there's no textbook, this is going to be great. Well, lo and behold, what he did is that he actually picked nonfiction and historical books for us to read as we came through the history of America. So no, there was no textbook, but there was a whole lot more that had to be done. But the first thing he always did with us is he had us open to the title page, and he would make us read aloud the author's name. And then his question was, what are the biases and presuppositions of this author? His concept, obviously, the biases and the presuppositions, or what somebody brings to history, can help create a filter through which they see history. And so when you read this book, there are some things about this author that you need to keep in mind. So I generally start these talks with my biases and presuppositions. I am pretty transparent when it comes to particularly talking about home rule. And I think the next slide will bear that out. You also have handouts with you, by the way. I am a card-carrying member of the Club of Home Rule, and Alex de Tocqueville actually had this to say in his writings whenever he came through America back in the 1800s about local government. The strength of free peoples resides in the local community. Local institutions are to liberty what primary schools are to science. They put it within the people's reach. They teach people to appreciate its peaceful enjoyment and accustom them to make use of it. Without local institutions, a nation may give itself a free government, but it has not got a spirit of liberty. I actually have this quote, as nerdy and geeky as it is, by my telephone. And it is what I see whenever either citizens or county commissioners or county attorneys or county managers or a state legislator calls me. This is actually what I see next to my landline. And so my first bias and presupposition is I'm a big believer in home rule. The next thing is that you need to know where I come from. The Florida Association of Counties is a private voluntary association. It is a not-for-profit corporation. All 67 counties in Florida are members. It is not mandatory that the counties in Florida be members of the Florida Association of Counties. We are not a regulatory body. We don't conduct ethics investigations. We don't do any of those sorts of things. I get phone calls from citizens all the time complaining about their county commissioner and wanting me to put them in jail. That is not what we do. There are people who will do that for you, but that is not us. Our core mission, though, is that we help counties effectively serve and represent Floridians by strengthening and preserving county home rule. It's a good thing I work where I do, huh? Through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And today I'm here not as an advocate. I'm not here to tell you all whether the charter form of government makes sense for Manatee County. I'm not here to advocate that if the community were to take that path, which provisions are good for Manatee County. Those are only decisions that you, as the Manatee County community, can make for yourself. So I am here in the role of education and to talk about what it means to be a charter county in the state of Florida, though. All right, the what-fors. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about what is a charter county, what are the differences between a charter and a non-charter county, what can be included in a charter, And what are the steps to become and to change a charter once you have one? Well, the basics. I'm also, this is, I guess, the third bias. I'm a big believer in words. I mean, obviously, I don't do math for a living. In fact, I've been fired from anything related to numbers ever. If it's a word, give it to me. I will analyze it until the cows come home, but don't give me numbers. But this is where I start. I want to make sure that this afternoon that we are all on the same page in terms of vocabulary and in terms of words, and that we know what the community is talking about when we talk about charter and we talk about non-charter and we talk about home rule. What are those things and how do they fit within the governmental structure that makes up all of Florida? So we are going to spend a few minutes on the basics of what is a county, how is a county different than a municipality or a city, what forms of government are offered to the counties in Florida, who are the other county officers, meaning other than county commissioners, and are charter counties really different? And I say that question that way because there are some myths, and yes, they are different, and we will talk about that, but there are some myths related to home rule and non-charter counties that we're going to spend some time on. Well, what is a county? The first two counties, Escambia and St. John's in Florida, were created in 1821. At that time, a provisional government established a county judicial system, appointed county judges, clerks, and sheriffs, and the government of the county was administered through the court system by 5 justices of the peace. Now, while there aren't 5 county commissioners in Manatee, there are 7. This should look vaguely familiar. We haven't really strayed, quite frankly, from county government very far from the very beginning. We still are associated with the state court system and county court system. We have county judges, we still have clerks, we still have sheriffs, and we still have a government that is administered through a board, whether it's 5 or 7 if you're a non-charter county. A county. Historically, I need you to suspend what you know at the moment is home rule for counties in Florida, because I need to set this up for you. Historically and in other parts of the country, a county is a political subdivision of the state established by the state to execute state services and functions at the local level. What in the world does that mean? Well, historically and truly in most other places in the entire country, a county isn't anything other than lines that have been drawn on a map by the state legislature where state services and state mandates are carried out. Now, some of those concepts still hold true, but there's very little political power that is given to a county in most parts of the country unless the legislature actually gives it to them. Okay? If you come to Tallahassee and you were to go to the Department of Juvenile Justice or the Department of Corrections or the Department of Health, they aren't providing services or housing or flu shots there. Where are they doing those things? Where are they taking care of juveniles? Where are they housing prisoners? Where are they giving flu shots? Here, at the local level. So all of those state services delivered at the local level through counties, political subdivisions, truly arms of the state. You don't move this unless the state, as the brain, said move your arm, okay? That's historical for Florida, and it is that way in most of the country. Very involuntary, where those lines get drawn on the map and how the services are delivered and what it is that a county is supposed to do. Contrast that with a municipality. Okay, a municipality is a local government that serves its citizens who created it by charter. Well, immediately there's a distinction. This sounds like something voluntary. This doesn't sound like drawing lines on a map and requiring that certain services be delivered. And in fact, that is. A city is from the ground up, meaning a group of citizens have come together because they live in close proximity to each other, and they have decided that either they want additional or different services or programs or what have you, and they come together and they write a charter, a local constitution, and then they vote on it. Now, obviously, it's more complicated than that, but that's the basics of what we're talking about. Something voluntary versus a form of government that is not voluntary. Now, in Florida, though, we've got a lot of tension and overlapping of services and programs at the local level being provided by the county and the cities with the rise of home rule, and frankly, in 1968, a lot because of the League of Women Voters around the state. Constitutional amendment was talked about in the Constitutional Revision Commission of 1968, put to the voters to give home rule not only to counties but also to municipalities, and it passed. And in Florida, these definitions hold true a little bit, but frankly, they create more tension now than they really provide differences. But I think it's important to understand the history of what a county was. Now, a special district, think of even the school district. Think if you have any local water control districts, a hospital district. It is a local government, but it is created by another level of government for a very specific purpose. The next one is actually a list of what counties do. So I've put out there the idea that there was this historical concept of counties and that we've got some tension with municipalities. Well, let me give you a couple of examples of what I mean. What do counties do? Traditionally, the state-mandated duties were to assess the property within the county, to be the official record keeper, to maintain the rural roads, to administer elections and perform judicial functions. Okay, all of those things still go on today. But in Florida, there's this whole list of things under the expansion of services, and you can add to that list. I mean, we could spend all day adding things that your county government does in Florida. And I would venture to say that most of those things are also done by Manatee County. And let me just stop for a second and talk about Florida and why there's tension over counties versus municipalities. Now, I don't mean to necessarily set it up that way, but why they get blurred. There are a couple of actual demographic phenomenon that had gone on. At the same time of the 1968 constitutional revision, granting home rule to counties and cities in Florida was also at exactly the same time as one of the big population booms in Florida. And so we had a tremendous number of people coming into the state and coming from either New England, coming down I-95, or they were coming from the Midwest into actually a large part of this part of the state. Those folks were looking for more what you might term municipal type services. They wanted certain kinds of streetlights. They wanted wider sidewalks. They wanted curbside pickup for their garbage disposal. They wanted enhanced police services. They wanted advanced life support in ambulance that the county wasn't providing. But we had all of these people coming to Florida and home rule at the same time. And let me tell you that today, there are 50% of the people in Florida, in the fourth largest state in the country, live in the unincorporated areas of the state. That's half of the fourth largest state in the country do not live in a municipality. Where do those folks turn for municipal type services that they're often used to in other parts of the country? The county government. And because of home rule, the county could provide it. And we'll talk about legally, meaning they could provide those services and a huge demand for services. And so you do find counties doing lots of things that 60 years ago were only done by municipalities. The counties are now doing it for half of the population for the fourth largest state in the country. And that's why we find a lot of the tension and overlap. Well, how do all of these things get done? These are the three basic forms of county government in the state of Florida for counties. County commission form, the county commission administrator form, and the commission elected chairperson form. Under the commission form, we still have 10 counties in the state that operate under this particular form of government, and yes, they are mostly small rural counties. And the way they operate is you have, and just for purposes of simplicity, we'll say 5 county commissioners, and there is no hired professional administrator that helps to carry out the county commission's policies. And so what you have is the director of public works, the director of sanitation, the director of animal control, all of those various departments reporting directly to the Board of County Commissioners. And this is left over from way back when what we actually elected, particularly in the rural areas, were commissioners over a particular subject matter. So you might elect a commissioner of bridges, and you might elect a commissioner of sanitation. And then as a group of 5, they would then come together as the Board of County Commissioners. So it's a little bit of a transition even from that more historic model, but we still have 10 counties in Florida that operate in this way as just a strictly county commission form of government. Now, the commission county administrator form of government, we have about 57 counties in the state that this is where they operate, or 54, somewhere around there, where they operate, where the Board of County Commissioners comes together and hires a professional county administrator. The county administrator then is the only person, usually in addition to the county attorney, that reports directly to the Board of County Commissioners. The director of public works, the director of solid waste, the director of Parks and Recreation, those people all report to the county administrator, who reports to the board. And so what you have is the Board of County Commissioners establishing policy and legislation that then gets carried out by the county administrator. And then finally, the commission elected chairman. We only have 3 counties in the state. It's Miami-Dade, Jacksonville, Duval, and Orange that has a county-wide elected executive, much like you might think of in the municipal context of a mayor. Now, Volusia has a county-wide elected chair. It isn't just a ceremonial position among the county commission, but that individual doesn't have any additional powers other than just being a regular county commissioner. In Jacksonville, Duval, Miami-Dade, and Orange, that is not the case. The elected chair executive actually has certain powers, like veto, for example, even though they sit on the county commission. Okay, Rosalie. The other county officers at the local level that help to do all of the things that a county government does are established in the Constitution in Florida: the property appraiser, the tax collector, the clerk of the court, the sheriffs, and the supervisor of elections. And these folks, as you all know, are independently elected solitary officials, which can make sometimes, we'll call them intergovernmental relations, difficult, meaning you then have an entire board of county commissioners that is dealing with a singularly elected official. And that dynamic, depending on the locality and the issue, can be thorny at times, or it can be great. Okay. All right, so that's the basics of all counties in Florida and what they all look like. But what is home rule? And these are just sort of some lay concepts to think about. The transfer of certain state powers to local entities in matters of local concern, but it is not complete autonomy, offers locals more control over their internal affairs and alleviates the need for state legislation of local concerns. And these ideas are ones that are consistent with traditional American ideals of self-governance and independence. This idea of self-governance and independence, not only from a county, can create some tension with municipalities, but it can also create tension with the state legislature. Home rules, we'll talk about in just a second, has given counties in Florida, even non-charter counties, extraordinarily broad powers to chart your own destiny. And there are times when that destiny runs headlong into your local legislative delegation. And so the first myth that we really want to bust is that non-charter counties in Florida do have home rule power. Okay, we'll talk about what the distinctions are, but there are things that non-charter counties in Florida can do on their own without state legislation. And I want to spend just a minute on where this all comes from, which is the Constitution. And yes, again, back to geek and nerd, I carry this around with me. I've had judges ask for a copy of it from me before. But I do carry around the Constitution because this is where it all comes from in Florida in terms of power and authority for counties. And this is what the Constitution has to say with respect to charter counties, that they shall have all powers of local self-government not inconsistent with general law or with special law approved by vote of the electors. They may enact county ordinances not inconsistent with general law. The charter shall provide which shall prevail in the event of a conflict between county and municipal ordinances. Now, let me stop for just a second. Rosalie, you can leave it there for a second. And let me talk about this inconsistent with general law and what is different about that than what existed prior to 1968. Prior to 1968 and the citizens of Florida voting approving the constitutional amendment, counties in Florida needed permission from the state legislature to do everything. And when I say everything, I mean everything. It needed to be expressed, and it needed to either be in a special act, which was a piece of legislation of the entire legislature, but it might just apply to Manatee County, or a general law, which is something that you would find in the volumes of the Florida statutes. Let's say, for example, that the county commission had an open position. At the time, probably was called dog catcher. Now it's animal control officer. But let's say there was an open position and there was a special act that said, Manatee County, you have the authority to hire a dog catcher, and they can only make $20,000, and they don't have to have a college degree. But let's say that Manatee County decided in this open position that they wanted somebody with some veterinary science background, so they wanted at least a college degree, some sort of science background, and they had the perfect candidate that they thought, but they wanted to pay this person $25,000 a year. They couldn't do it without getting literally in the horse and buggy and going to Tallahassee and getting a legislative change through the entire Florida legislature to that special act. That's how specific the authority needed to be. And so this not inconsistent with general law or special act is exactly the opposite. Manatee County now assumes it has the authority to go and find somebody and require a Bachelor of Science degree to be the animal control officer, and they can pay them $25,000 a year on their own. It's exactly the opposite of the way things used to be. Now, here's what the Constitution has to say with respect to non-charter counties. And we're going to focus actually on these first two lines. Non-charter counties shall have such power of self-government as is provided by general or special law. Well, that sounds like the old stuff, pre-1968. Ginger, I thought you just told us that non-charter counties had home rule. Well, they do, and we'll get there. But yes, this is different language than from the Constitution saying that a charter county can do anything not inconsistent with law. This says you still can only do those things as provided by. Okay? Rosalie. Let me show you the end of this story a little bit. Sandy Dallenbert, who was the official commentary recorder to the 1968 Constitutional Revision Commission about these two provisions and exactly on this issue of charter versus non-charter counties and their power, said this: thus, charter counties and non-charter counties apparently start from different poles in their relationships with legislative enactments. Both could conceivably be the same depending on the legislation adopted. And here is what the legislature did in 1970. So this is statutory. What the legislature did in 1970 said, the legislative and governing body of a county shall have the power to carry on government to the extent not inconsistent with general or special law. That's the phrasing of charter county power in the Constitution. And they go on, and you can see these in your handouts, and Rosalie, you can flip through. We can go to the next one. And to make it even crystal clear, the legislature then said the provisions of this section shall be liberally construed in order to effectively carry out the purpose of this section and to secure for the counties the broad exercise of home rule powers authorized by the state constitution. So what gives? Well, here's what gives. is that a charter county is a county, obviously, whose citizens have approved a local charter that we'll talk about the details of, granting the county government home rule authority directly from the Florida Constitution. So the real difference in an organic way is where the power comes from. And a charter county, the power of home rule comes directly from the Constitution, which means directly from the citizens of Florida who voted for it, versus a non-charter county where the Constitution gave the legislature the authority to give it to the non-charter counties, and they did. But there's that intervener called the state legislature. Okay, that's the difference in terms of the power. You can go to the next one. All right, well, here's where the charter counties are in Florida. I know you can't see the names, but you can just look actually at the colors. Obviously, in the southwestern part of the state, we have quite a few. You've got in the southeastern corner, the I-4 corridor is pretty well blanketed. You've got some up in the northeast, and then, oh my stars, what happens when you get to I-75 and I-10 and go west? There's only two. That's the Panhandle. Yes, we're a little different. Lots of political reasons, a lot of small rural counties also in that particular area, but we'll talk about some of the history of some of those. All right, so when did the counties in Florida become charters? We have 20 now in the state of Florida, and this chart just shows you when they became charter counties. Yes, all of the 7 urban counties are charters, but we've got some small rurals. We've got Wakulla, you've got Columbia in 2002, and then you have a whole host of medium-sized counties as well that are charter in the state. Other than where the power comes from, if I had to sum up the differences between charter and non-charter, because they can't be the same completely, right? We know that's got to be true, even though I've spent 20 minutes busting the myth that home rule does not apply to non-charter counties. Yes, there is. And the one major overarching difference between charter and non-charter counties is this one, is that a charter provides a local community with the potential for governmental reform at the county level, period. And I emphasize potential because it doesn't necessarily happen. And quite often it doesn't happen for a very long time, because as much as we want change in America, or certain segments of American population want change, it tends to come pretty slowly. And so often what you see is a county go from non-charter to charter, and the day they become charter, often they don't look much different than they did the day before. But what is in place is this potential for government reform, and we'll talk about how that plays out. All right, so some of the specific differences between charter and non-charter. A charter can choose the form of government. That elected executive form, for example, is only available to charter counties in Florida. It isn't something that Manatee, as a non-charter county, could even consider, absent a charter. With respect to the commission administrator form of government, a charter can also have provisions in it of what the community wants as the minimum qualifications for that professional, for example. And then you have a countywide vote on, we want this person to have this many years of experience, have this type of education, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How that person gets hired and fired, all of those details can be included in a charter. The power to tax in the unincorporated areas. Yes, there are lots of communities, when they talk about charter, one of the things that comes up is it going to cost me more as a citizen now to live in a charter county? There's only been one study done, and it's pretty dated at the moment. I mean, it was back in the late 1980s out of West Florida, and the answer was no, not really. But having said that, I do think you need to understand that There are certain powers of taxation that a charter county has that a non-charter county does not. And it gets back to, in Florida, this blending of municipal and county powers. There are certain tax sources that if you look in the Florida statutes, it only speaks in terms of municipalities being able to impose them. And what the courts have told us is, but for a charter county, they have the same powers, and even though it doesn't say county, it only says city, the county can impose it in the unincorporated areas. The public utility tax is one. Back in the day, the cigarette tax was another one. Those are the two prime examples. There are also legislatively some classifications and additional tax sources that are given to certain charter counties. But that's more of a legislative matter than it is necessarily being just a function of a charter county. A charter can have the power to alter the functions of the county officers, the power to have countywide authority, and I've got slides on these in particular. Special acts must be approved by the electors to have a limiting effect. Citizen involvement can actually be increased, and there are certain legislative classification benefits to being a charter county. Here are the choices that you can make on the county forms of government. The legislative branch, the Board of County Commissioners. You can have a different districting scheme than what you might have as a non-charter county. The election methodology, meaning partisan or nonpartisan, that choice can be made in a charter. Salaries of the commissioners, caps can be established, and terms of office can also be established. We now have 10 charter counties in the state that have term limits on their county commissioners. And we can debate later whether that's a good idea or not. But they're there, and it's an opportunity that the courts have said that a charter can have in Florida. And with the executive branch, we've talked about that, the appointed professional administrator, an elected chairman, or an elected executive. Power to tax. These are the public service tax we talked about, the communication services tax. Currently, there's a higher rate for charter counties. There's a historic reason for that. Certain local options on the sales tax are available to certain charter counties. There's some other miscellaneous tax sources, but I'm here to tell you most of those apply to Miami-Dade County, which wouldn't be you. This last bullet, though, there's actually the power to limit certain powers, or an opportunity to limit certain powers of taxation in a charter. Most folks, when I say folks, I mean local communities tend to focus on, well, they're going to tax us to death because now we're a charter county. And actually Sarasota County at one time had a provision in its charter that required all new taxes to be approved by a referendum, even when the state statutory scheme did not require a referendum. And so that's actually a limitation on the power of the county commission to unilaterally be able to levy taxes. They've repealed that provision out of the charter, but it was there at one time, and it is a limitation that isn't something that you would otherwise have. With the other county officers, certain choices, again, that can be made in the charter. A community can keep the status quo, meaning that the sheriff, the supervisor of elections, the tax collector, the property appraiser, the clerk, they function exactly the same as they did the day after the charter as they did the day before. They still derive their powers from the Constitution and the total statutory scheme. But there are changes that can be made, and there are counties in Florida that have done that. You can create what is called elected charter offices, meaning that the charter actually says, basically strips them of their constitutional officer status and makes them charter offices. So they're still elected on a countywide basis, and their duties and functions may still be the same, but their power is actually derived from the charter. And then at the other extreme is that those offices can actually be eliminated as elected offices, and the functions and duties absorbed within county government. And then the tax collector, for example, would become the director of finance, or budget control or what have you, and then it's just a department head like any other. Now you might change the org chart, but they are appointed then officers at that point, just like any other department head. The functions and duties still have to be carried out, but they are carried out in a very different way. And you can treat them individually as well, meaning a community might only want to do something with the office of the clerk. What we find in some communities, Broward and Orange has done this, where the clerk functions have been split in the charter between the court functions and then the finance functions for the county. Orange actually has an elected comptroller, for example, that serves as the chief financial officer of the county. They have split those duties of the clerk. The clerk is also still elected. That can be done, but then everybody else, when I say everybody else, I mean the other constitutional officers, are just left alone. So it isn't like everything has to change or nothing can change. It can be extraordinarily incremental, or nothing at all. All right, countywide authority. The choices in the charter. You probably don't remember, but whenever you go back and look at the handouts, there's a sentence in the Constitution for both charter counties and then one for non-charter counties that talks about when county ordinances and municipal ordinances conflict with each other, which one prevails. There is no preference that is stated for charter counties in the Constitution. What the Constitution says, though, a charter has to pick. This is one of the few things that a charter absolutely positively has to do. And a charter has to state, a county charter has to state, if a county ordinance and a municipal ordinance are in conflict, which one is going to prevail. Now, that doesn't mean that the county has to say that the county ordinances will prevail. In fact, by and large in Florida, what we have is still the default position, which is municipal ordinances prevail. Now, the only exception to that is that, again, this is not an all or nothing proposition. Volusia County, for example, where I think the entire county is almost beach. Beach is its economic engine. And in the county charter, all things related to the beaches in Volusia County are preempted to the county government. And so the county ordinances will prevail when it comes to beach management, but everything else the community has left to the cities. So they've taken a regional approach, if you would, to their beaches, but everything else they're going to allow the municipalities, and if they happen to disagree with the county, then their ordinance is actually going to trump the counties in that circumstance. But a charter has to pick which one. And then a non-charter, by the Constitution, it is the same, meaning that the municipal ordinances prevail over county ordinances. Okay. There are choices that a charter can make for citizen participation. A charter in Florida, both can provide for ordinances actually being enacted by a citizen initiative process, and charter amendments can also be proposed by a citizen initiative petition process, as well as getting a charter from the get-go, which we'll talk about in just a second. There are some policy decisions that a community in the citizen involvement substantive area has to take a look at, by what percentage of signatures will be required either for an ordinance or for an amendment to the charter, what distribution of the electorate do those signatures need to reflect, are there certain subject matter areas that are actually going to be excluded and not a part of the citizen initiative process, and then what is the procedure for the Board of County Commissioners once the requisite number of signatures are gathered. Let's say it's an ordinance, it's a noise ordinance. What then does the Board of County Commissioners, what is their obligation? And recall. A charter, this is also one of the automatics, is that by state law, the county commissioners are then subject to recall, just as are municipal officials. There are a couple of ways to get to be a county, a charter county in Florida, either through a charter commission, which the Board of County Commissioners can establish by resolution, or a citizen initiative process. Once those certain, I think it's 15% of the electorate, once those signatures are gathered, then the Board of County Commissioners doesn't have any choice. They have to appoint a Charter Review Commission. And by the way, if the Charter Commission is the way that a county decides to move down the path of charter government, none of the members of the Board of County Commissioners or the members of the local legislative delegation can sit on the commission. A special act coming through the Florida legislature, a community can work with its local legislative delegation, an ordinance, just a simple ordinance by the Board of County Commissioners. Now, I don't want you to think, oh, well, either they'll just do it to us, or how easy is that if you're a county commissioner. Leon County, my home county, it took over 10 years to become a charter county, and the way they finally did it was by an ordinance, but there were years and years and years of advisory committees that worked, meaning local citizen groups, even though they weren't officially a charter review commission, they were appointed advisory committees by the county commission, and the county commission really worked the community for a very long time. It's just that the wordsmithing finally was done just by ordinance, but that didn't mean that it didn't take them 10 years to get there. Regardless of how a charter gets to the ballot, it goes on the ballot, and a county-wide vote is what is required. Here's a chart showing you the different ways that the charter counties in Florida became charter. 3 is a special act, the most actually by ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners, and then those that came through a charter review commission. The steps to change a charter: amendments can be proposed by the Board of County Commissioners, a citizen petition process, a charter review commission. Those provisions will be outlined in a charter and what the process is. The one thing I want to leave you with on this particular slide is sometimes there's a lot of fear in a community that once a charter becomes established, oh my goodness, what is the government going to do to us now? They're going to sneak things by us. I'm here to tell you that isn't the case. Every single amendment to the charter has to go singularly on the ballot. There is, if anything, more attention paid to amendments in the future, frankly, than maybe to the charter in the beginning, because they have to appear singularly on the ballot. All of the rules and laws that apply to constitutional amendments, for example, meaning they can only be one subject matter, the language on the ballot cannot be confusing and misleading to the voter, all of those standards also apply to charter amendments. It's not easy. It really isn't. It takes an entire community to make amendments, particularly if they are true governmental reform. To make those happen, it takes a whole community. This is not something that gets snuck by. All right, and our last slide, just a couple of hot topics that we're seeing right now. Ethics codes. We have several charter counties in Florida that have created their own inspector general at the local level just for ethics matters. We have some of the larger counties through the charter have created local commissions on ethics. And while that's not required, meaning it doesn't take a charter to get there, those counties that have done so have pulled the municipalities in as well. And so by doing that with the charter, there's a much more regional and uniform application of the codes of ethics at the local level. Term limits. This one got decided by the Supreme Court with respect to county commissioners about a year and a half ago now. The court has finally said that yes, in Florida, charter counties can have term limits on county commissioners. And as I mentioned, we now have 10 counties already in the state that have term limits on their commissioners. And then salary cap adjustments was also an issue at the same time. There was some confusing language in the statutory scheme about whether a charter could actually lift the cap or lower the cap. And what the court has said is that yes, a charter does have the ability to, even though it's inconsistent with that particular general law, they found some language statutorily that still allowed some room for a charter county to actually lower the salaries of their county commissioners because they're set by state statute. And we'll open it up for questions. One of the comments before, or as you're gathering any questions that you might have is, I usually get a question about, well, you know, there's only 20 counties, how come all 67 in Florida now are not charter counties? And I think I was mentioning before is that the local politics on charters, the politics comes from all angles, meaning the politics comes from relationships with the county to the municipalities in the county. It comes from the relationship of the county commission to those individual county officers that I mentioned. And sometimes it can even come from community groups. And so each county that has become a charter county really has its own story of why it became a charter, what the issues were, and where the political pressure, pro and con, actually came from. I would say that probably in the 1970s and the 80s, just generally speaking, even though individual stories, I believe, were very individual, generally speaking, it was the constitutional officers that were the big political barrier to becoming a charter county. I would say in the 90s and in the 2000s, the barrier was the relationship with the municipalities, but primarily over growth. And because we're not having the growth right now in the state, but we haven't had a charter county since 2008, so I'm not sure what the Great Recession, how that impacts the politics and the political science of becoming a charter county in Florida, but that's just a little bit about if there are trends. Whenever you're only talking about 20, those would be the only really two trends that I see, but I think the future is a little bit of a question mark right now for counties that are looking for charter in terms of where the political pressure, both pro and con, would come from. Yes, ma'am. And while she's walking, I guess the last disclaimer I have to tell you, and my children will absolutely back this one up, is I don't know everything. And if I don't know the answer to your question, I will say I don't know. I'm happy to give you my card, and I'm happy to help you find the answer. But if I don't know the answer, I'm not going to guess, and I'm just going to tell you I don't know. And there are things you're going to ask me that I'm not going to know the answer to, so go ahead.
Okay, my name is Katie Parola. I'm a former mayor of Bradenton Beach. Can you all hear me? Okay. And I'm so happy I have Carol Whitmore here. I have Joe Kane here, Jane Von Ham here, and we all go way back about county charter. And Carol, you can correct me if I'm wrong, okay? I think we tried it way back in the early 80s maybe with Pat Glass, our county commissioner, and she really wanted a chartered government. And she tried very hard to get it, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And then they tried again in '04. And it was the same thing again. More or less the cities were afraid to have it. And then the county came along with something we call the Accord. And I think that appeased a lot of people in those years. So what I'm getting at is that our county did try a couple of times, maybe more, but we tried. And personally speaking, I'm not afraid of a county charter. I think it would be a great thing for Manatee County.
There you go. Good. I just wanted to go
I
back
have
to
a
this one chart.
question. Carol Whitmore, County Commission. What Katie's talking about is at one of the times the county was looking at including the cities, but Sarasota County doesn't have it that way. They have a county commission with the unincorporated areas and not the cities. That wasn't ever brought up before Manatee County, so you may want to explain the difference because that wasn't what was approached to us years ago.
Let me take it from this perspective. If you look back on the front slide and then also on the handouts, it has our website for the Association of Counties. If you go there after today, there is a series of about 40 pages of spreadsheets that my assistant and I have put together over the last several years. These are all of the differences among and between the charter counties in Florida. They are tremendous, which is why I started by saying that it is very difficult unless a local community has its own discussion about the local community, what is a good idea for your local community or not a good idea, and what ultimately works from a historical perspective and what doesn't work, because the charter counties are all over the place in terms of the choices that they have made. As I mentioned, in the 90s and in the 2000s, certainly growth management was a huge issue that was going on, particularly with the relationship between the county commission and the city councils. And let me explain a little bit of why that difficulty was coming up. Because if you are a non-charter county, one of the things is that because the county ordinances cannot prevail over municipal ordinances, we have a lot of counties in this state that have a lot of municipalities. I mean, Polk County, which is a medium-sized county, has 21 municipalities. Well, that means you have 22 different growth management standards, meaning you've got each municipality plus the county. And if a charter county, though, in that circumstance, and particularly because of the growth that we were experiencing at that time, decided we think we need to be the regional government for this particular issue, then yes, you are likely going to butt heads up against your municipalities at that point, because they also have home rule legitimately from the Constitution and from the ground up. We talked about that. And so it can be difficult to bring those two things together, but that's really the dynamic that, particularly in that era that was going on, is just a real effort at trying to have a regional vision and using the county, because the municipalities are in the county, but using the county as the vehicle to bring forward a potential regional vision, particularly as it related to growth.
One of the big issues in the county, I wasn't personally as involved with it, but I understand that charter government was debated when there was a question of annexation. Could you speak a little to the annexation question when a municipality wants to annex land and the county may be opposed to it?
Back to the discussion on that there are certain legislative classifications that might be beneficial to a charter county. The legislature has also created some distinctions in the annexation process between a non-charter and a charter county. And I don't know off the top of my head exactly what that process is, but there are distinctions, and it is more difficult for a non-charter county to oppose annexation than it is in certain circumstances for a charter county. But again, a lot of it will depend on what is in the charter and how it speaks to addressing the annexation issue. That is an issue that can be talked about in the charter. And so again, that's back to where you go, but that there are some classifications that make it a little bit easier for a county to voice objections on annexation if it's charter and if certain language is in the charter. There was a case out of Seminole County recently, and when I say recently, I mean in the last 10 years, and then one out of Palm Beach County as well, addressing that particular issue. But they had certain language in their charter, and so a lot of it, again, goes back to the charter, which means it goes back to the people of this community, because you don't get the charter without a countywide vote.
Very good presentation.
Thank you,
I'm
Commissioner.
Betsy Benak, County Commissioner. I have a question about costs to administer a charter. Has there been studies that look at the cost? Is there always a charter review board? And that was my second question.
No, there is not always a charter review board, particularly from the beginning. You might recall there's a chart that actually most of the 20 charter counties became charter by ordinance of the Board of County Commissioners. But there will be likely in your charter a review commission that would meet, whether it's every 4 years, every 8 years, that is a citizen group that is embodied and empowered in the charter itself. So the costs are going to vary based on a local community. It's going to vary depending on how many attempts it takes, how long the studies have to be done. Columbia County and Wakulla County, the two smallest counties on here, in 2002, they became a charter county through a review commission. It only took one time, and they met for about a year, and they were done. They did it all on their own. I don't know exactly. My guess is their costs were pretty minimal. Wakulla was very similar. First time out of the box, got it on the ballot, and it was voted on. But Leon County, my home county, it took forever, 10 or 12 years. And I would venture to say probably a fair amount of administrative costs went into the entire process of educating the community and hiring consultants and some of those sorts of things. So it really just depends on, I would say, the issues that the community is looking at, and the thornier those issues are, the more likely your costs are going to go up in terms of what it's going to take to get to the ballot. Just because you'll need more information, you need more studies, you need more help, you need more education. All of that comes when the issues are controversial. In Columbia, it was a very anti-Board of County Commissioners movement, and they just had everybody. They wanted term limits and they wanted salary caps, and that was their entire agenda in Columbia County, and it went on the ballot and done. So, yes, sir.
Thank you. This is a great presentation. This debate in our county came up prior to my involvement in local politics, so I kind of watched it from afar. And prior to this meeting, I went to check with the city clerk, and we had like a 1-inch, maybe 2-inch thick stack of stuff that involvement from the cities and the counties. At the time in 2004, it was mainly about height. The county was trying to put a 35-foot height cap in place, or a member of the county commission. And it's funny, I've got articles here that date Carol Whitmore, who was then mayor of Holmes Beach, was against it. Larry Bussell, who was then the mayor of Palmetto and is now on a county commission, were against it. But at the end of it, and there's a document here with the city of Bradenton has an official proclamation that they're against charter government because it conflicts with home rule. Now, I got a question at the end of this. The one thing that I see is I've got a copy of the Sarasota charter government here, and they do indeed. They have enacted that municipal ordinance prevails, which I think if that were the case, that would have completely eliminated the whole desire to have charter government in 2004. So there was much fighting and much hurt feelings and much discord over it. But then what came out of it was something called an accord, which the cities and counties all got together with, and I think we're still operating under, which was quite creative, and I believe, is working. So, have you heard of any other communities coming together after a big charter fight and creating a accord resolution?
I don't have specific knowledge off the top of my head, but it certainly sounds like a model that my guess is has been replicated in other communities, but I don't know specifically to be able to give you another example.
And then my own last observation on this is, as a member of Minnesota Board of Minnesota League, I look at the Sarasota government, city and county, and I look at Manatee government, city and counties, and I believe that we're doing a very good job here. When we compare the governments, we do very well comparatively here in Manatee County. And the only thing that I believe came the big difference between Manatee County and Sarasota County right now is the term limits. And right now there's much discussion going on in Sarasota County over term limits because very popular elected official John Thaxton had to leave because of term limits, and I believe he probably would have been reelected until he decided not to be. And what is going to happen in the next cycle is Nora Patterson, equally popular. Carolyn Mason is going to be leaving. So at the next election cycle, because of term limits, the county commission is going to lose 4 of its 5 seats, and there is much concern as to whether that was really a very good idea. So sometimes be careful what you wish for.
Ginger, thanks for being here today. As a member of the Board of County Commissioner during the Accord and actually chairing at that time and being a very active member of FAC during that time as well, I want one thing to be understood. The Board of County Commissioners never agreed to drive a charter government formation. We actually stepped out and asked, and that's why we went into the Accord conversations. We actually asked the citizens, said that we wanted it to be citizen driven, and I really think the most successful governments probably do come through that petition process that then says we will then develop the charter committees that will look at and start that process. But that first step for us needed to be citizens driving that train. We wanted them to gather the signatures and prove that the whole county wanted that to happen. So I think the Accord, it was a very contentious time. Growth was at such an incredibly rapid pace and things were happening that we tried to do what we could to work with the municipalities, but yet contain that development that was going on and impacting so much. So I think when you put up those three processes, I think there were three, I wanted to ask again, how many were driven by petition and how many were driven by ordinance? Because I couldn't remember. I don't remember. And what is your recommendation? Do you see where, how they work, you know, when they work better or not, as from a process standpoint? You said that Leon took 10 years, and was not petition driven though, was it?
No, it wasn't. But to say that it wasn't petition driven, which is why I use them as an example, is it's a little bit misleading because the county commission worked for years and years and years with the community. And while the mechanism of getting the charter to the ballot wasn't a charter review commission, it was very much citizen driven in terms of the issues that were raised. Again, because it took so long, there were advisory committees that were created that met for that entire period of time. And what you find in the ordinance, particularly, that it is just a mechanism to get on the ballot. And so while I'm not a politician and I don't run campaigns, I would certainly think that it would be extraordinarily difficult for any Board of County Commissioners just to enact an ordinance, stick it on the ballot, and think that the community is going to support it. Meaning, because this is a community-driven choice from the get-go, and that's just inherent in the process. And I mean, I would say that the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Authoritarian, perhaps, way of getting to the ballot would be the special act, which is what comes through the legislative delegation. It goes through them to the state legislature, gets voted on, and then comes back down. Now, yes, you still have to vote on it, but in terms of being removed from the local community, I would argue that that, more so than the ordinance method, is much more removed, and we only have 3 of them in the state, and there has to be a reason for that.
Joe Williams, this may be a rather dumb question, but in all that I've heard here today, I wonder if at the end of the day, when there is a charter, commission, or when there is not, who has the most power? Are the powers equal? Does the county have the most power? Do the municipalities have the most power? Is the power equal?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Again, it depends on the charter and what it establishes as the relationship between the county and the municipalities that are in the county. I think I can say this accurately, is that the county is never in charge of the municipalities. It just isn't. It is in Florida, or it has the potential in Florida to be more of a regional government, but unless you're Miami-Dade County, and there's only one of them in the state, and their powers predate 1968, the county doesn't get to be in charge of the municipalities. Now, there may be certain policy decisions that the local community has decided that it wants a more regional vision to, but that isn't the same as delegating powers between a municipality and a county. There is a mechanism for doing that, but there's a whole different constitutional way that a municipality actually delegates a service to the county, and that has to be by a dual referendum, meaning countywide and in the municipality itself. It isn't something that is done very often at all. In fact, we go entire election cycles in Florida without that sort of dual referenda, where a municipality is actually giving something wholesale to the county, and absent that, the county is just not in charge of the municipalities.
My name is Edward Goff. I have a question about whether or not is there a provision for a charter county government to return to the traditional form? And if so, has it ever happened?
Yes, a charter can be completely repealed in a community. To the best of my knowledge, I think we've only ever had one that went back, but then they came back, and I think it was Sarasota. Repealed it, but then brought the charter back. And on that note, actually, just a thought, the individual provisions, just because they're in a charter or might be an amendment that is adopted in the future, doesn't mean it's there forever. It can be taken out of the charter by a vote just like it got in. So they are organic documents in terms of making sure that they fit with whatever the times happen to be in a local community.
Well, I think we've learned a lot today. I know I have. And I wanted to mention something that impressed me. I went through the internet like I always do, and I'm looking for stuff on charter government. And I looked at some of the charters that counties have up. And I think what impressed me the most was the preamble to the Broward County Charter. And here's what it says. The citizens of Broward County join together in the belief that county government should be reflective of the people of the county and should serve them in achieving a more responsive and efficient form of local government, which will enhance their civic lives, and in order to empower the people of this county to make changes in their own government, do hereby avail themselves of an opportunity afforded by the Florida Constitution to adopt this Home Rule Charter, conceived in the interest of cooperation with the municipalities and other governmental units of this county. And I think that summed it up pretty well as to the whole purpose of charter and the what it hopes to achieve. So thank you all for coming today, and our president would like to say a few words before we leave.
Well, to follow up, Ginger, thank you for a very professional and well-presented presentation for us. We love it when people come well-prepared and do a good job of actually presenting the information that they have. Lots of people know a lot of things, but then to be able to present it well is another thing. So we thank you. And by the way, when your teenage daughters happen to say that you don't know what you know, you just have them call us, okay? We'll take care of it. We'll take care of it. We've all been through that. Okay, let's see. So just briefly, our next hot topic will be on October 14th. That will be, the title is How Can We Ensure That Our Schools Excel? The speakers will be the Manatee School Superintendent, Rick Mills, the Manatee Deputy Superintendent for Instruction, Dr. Diana Green, and Dr. Bill Jones, Principal of Manatee School for the Arts charter school. So we should have some good information in that hot topic as well. We hope you all can come. Let's see. Lastly, or in closing, I should say, we want to thank the Bradenton Women's Club for giving us this facility again. Thank you, METV, for taking good care of us continually, repeatedly, might I say. Yes, thank you. And before you leave today, for those of you who are not members of the League, we would like you to consider supporting us. As you all know, we are a bipartisan organization. Our main mission is to make sure that we have an informed electorate, and we'd like to have you all be part of us. So thank you for coming today. We look forward to seeing you next time.